Hello, my name is Damian Oakley, and today I am going to share my presentation for my final project for CSCI 1260. So just as a little introduction, to keep it simple, I created a small quiz game using Godot written in GDScript, its own language. I was originally going to use Blazor a third time after we used it for our previous two projects. I was just going to create a shopping application or a movie information site, but I decided to step out of my comfort zone and do something I thought would actually be more enjoyable. Using Godot, I thought about making a visual novel as I had recently gotten into those, but I didn't know how it would best fit the requirements designed for this project. I eventually settled on a quiz game as it would best fit what I needed to design, and it was also something that I hadn't really worked on up to this point, so it would be a little new for me. So a little bit about this framework itself. Godot Engine is an open source community-supported game engine that allows users to create and design 2D and 3D games. These games are then capable of being ported to all sorts of different platforms like desktops, mobile, and consoles. Games in Godot can be written with GDScript, Godot's own personal language, but you can also use C# and C++. For the purpose of this project, I decided to use GDScript as it just seemed fair to use what was most compatible with the engine itself. Now, Godot supports the usage of nodes, which are sort of like classes in C#, to control gameplay elements and events, which in turn affect the scenes or screens that a player would view while playing. The interactions between nodes and scenes is similar to what we've gone over concerning classes and other object-oriented principles, in which certain objects and elements interact with each other to produce a finished result. As I mentioned, I was going to make a simple and customizable quiz game using Godot, in which users could actually add their own custom questions to the game. I believe this would be a good first project with the framework that wasn't too complex or hard to design. After installing Godot, I would turn to YouTube to better understand how to write basic code in GDScript, how to navigate the UI, and how to operate nodes and scenes. During development, I would also utilize search engines and Claude to teach myself if necessary. While my process was a little loose in some places, overall it was mainly the same. I first made sure that the user could actually navigate through scenes with the buttons properly, which involved me understanding how signals worked in Godot and how they could be tied to certain actions to produce effects. I would also need to preload base quiz questions on startup, so I researched how to use Godot's dictionary methods to tie a specific question with its own options and answers. Now, I also needed correct and incorrect screens based on what you answered for a question, and a score would also be calculated based on what you got. This involved me researching how global scripts worked in Godot, in which variables would persist throughout all scripts. I then focused on the main selling point, which is adding and removing custom questions that are stored in a text file. I was required to research the file access methods for Godot to allow users to read and write to a specific file. Overall, I ensured that I was integrating a more complex data structure other than an array or a list, file in and out, which is seen by file access, and exception handling, which does work differently than we did in C#, but it does produce more or less the same result. Now, a few notable aspects as I was designing this game. While GDScript holds some similarities to the C# fundamentals that we went over during this course, there are also some important distinctions I had to be aware of. Godot heavily relies on interacting with nodes or elements on display, but thankfully the engine's interface is very user-friendly, and I was able to efficiently utilize these tools after a quick tutorial. As mentioned earlier, I would need to hold quiz questions in a dictionary data structure in order to better tie options and answers to one question. Similar to C#, GDScript uses curly braces to initialize dictionaries, though they are still very different in terms of overall syntax. Coincidentally, my previous semester final project for 1250 actually required file in and out code, so I decided to take that code and translate it into GDScript for my project right now. While this did involve some research on how the translation would look, as to how the While this did involve some research on how the translation would look for each line, overall, my two code chunks of the different languages actually looked more or less the same. Now, I did run into a few challenges as I was designing this game. Possibly my biggest challenge was trying to figure out how to remove text by clicking on it. Specifically, I had to remove custom questions from a file. This took quite a bit of research and involved me loading the custom file, filtering out the question to be removed, emptying out the current file, and then reloading all the remaining questions to that file. I alluded to this earlier, but I needed to learn about global scripts in order to hold the data that would persist throughout the game, like the score and questions. While this ended up being simple within the engine, I did have to research how to navigate the UI in order to auto-load a script that would hold variables that are global throughout the entire game. And just in general, the framework and engine of Godot were entirely new to me. I had never used them before, and I had to learn how to do so in just a few weeks. And now I believe it is time for a quick demonstration. Now this is my quiz game. Now if I was to click play, we would receive a question and 3 options to select from. Now if I was to click one option that was correct, I would receive 1 point. However, if I was to choose an incorrect option, I would lose 1 point. I have added a timer up here in order to push the user along and ensure that they do not spend too much time on one question. If it runs out, you also lose a point, but you cannot go below 0 points. And yep, game over, your score is 0. Now add questions. We have no custom questions at the moment, so nothing is displayed here. But if we click add, we can change that. We have several fields that we need to fill out. So say my question is, am I deserving of an A? Option 1 would be yes. Option 2 would be no. Option 3 would be it depends. Now we have to select an option that would be the answer. Let's go option 1, obviously. Save it, and our custom question is now in a file. Now if I were to go back to play, if we go through a few questions, am I deserving an A? Yep, it's right there. I will say, the base questions and custom questions, they are put together in one list and shuffled, so you will never get the same order of questions each game. Now let's do something wrong with adding custom questions. Let's just type something random. Let's say we try to save something without entering an option. So option 3 is empty. Sorry, you must enter option 3. I have added exception handling for when this happens so that these errors can be caught, and each question is bound to have 5 parts. So question, 3 options, and an answer. So let's just type gibberish in again. With the answer, let's go option 2. Let's save that. Yep, it's here again. Now just a little more concerning custom questions. If I type yes again, and if I try to save, sorry, this question already exists. As seen in exception handling right here. We cannot have duplicates of the same question. You also must select an option as well. So if I type this and try to save, sorry, an answer must be selected. So let's select option 1. We have 3 custom questions now. Now, we can easily remove one by clicking on the underlined right here of the question. So we have these 2 gibberish questions remaining, and both of them should appear. So we have our horrible gibberish questions to deal with. Yep, 5 questions in total. My 3 base and 2 custom. I will obviously add more base questions before submission. That is my quiz game. It is not very complex at all, but I did have a lot of fun designing it. So to summarize, as you have seen, I create a quiz game in Godot, both to involve a hobby I personally love and to achieve all that was required me for this project. I love video games, and that was what inspired me to choose Godot in the first place, to do something new for this project. I still believe my visual novel idea would have been difficult considering the specifications of this project, but I might actually consider it as a more personal project later on. This game can certainly look more appealing, and I might change that before submission, but again, I tend to make sure the game actually operates well first before making sure it looks good. If I were to add anything to this project, I believe multiplayer would be a good start, as it would add more replayability. It could also be achieved through simple research into other small Godot games, and with how multiplayer actually operates in those games as well. To use that as an example. Overall, I heavily enjoyed Godot and this project overall, and I would actually love to work with it in the future. I had a great time with it. That's going to wrap it up for this presentation. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.